Back live with you tonight. Inclusivity in the Labour Council. Nedlac has become a major topic of debate among stakeholders. Some criticize Nedlac for failure to represent the interests of workers in policy discussions, and some are concerned about the admission of every organization that applies to be a member of the council, saying this would cause problems in reaching consensus on multiple issues. But to really understand the root cause of the unhappiness, we are trying to get to the bottom of it, and we're joined by Nedlac Executive Director Lisa Seftel, South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry President Advocate Mtho Xulu, and Fedusa's General Secretary Riefdah Ajam. You can be a part of the conversation tonight on 072-110-5584. You can tweet us at Newzroom 405. Lisa, Riefdah, and Mtho, good evening, and thank you very much for coming on. We do appreciate you. Let's start with you, Lisa, as Nedlac. What do you make of the call by the Employment Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi that there needs to be a consultation with social partners to review the Nedlac's constitution to promote greater inclusivity? Do you support that call? Are you against that call? Are you suspect towards that call? What's your feeling?
Oh, we are part of that call. Let me just say that over the last 2 years, the social partners at Nedlac have been engaging on looking at updating, reforming, reinventing, improving the Nedlac legislation, the Nedlac Act, as well as the bill, and as well as the Constitution. And one of the issues that has been put on the table in respect to the Constitution is to improve inclusivity, with due regard to the fact that Nedlac is a national organization and it needs to, in the majority, consist of organizations which have a national footprint, as well as organizations which are democratically constituted and are able to get a mandate from employees. But, I would say on behalf of the Nedlac staff and our key social partners, there is consensus on the need to improve the Constitution in relationship to issues of inclusivity. Thanks.
Yeah. Advocate Xulu, the feeling is that currently at least from some quarters, the founding documents of Nedlac are no longer fit for purpose. What's the view from the Chamber?
Thank you, Thabo. Yes, I think you're correct in your assessment that the current constitution and the bill, and I guess the practice that we've gotten used to, is no longer fit for purpose, because the inspiration that founded Nedlac close to 30 years ago, the landscape has totally changed, and the voices have become more diverse. So when we started off, for instance, you had almost a narrow representation of business, labor, and government. But as the economy has evolved and issues have become more public, there is a need to refine it. And unfortunately, that reform has been taking too long. And I think events in the country have overtaken Nedlac. Even within, for instance, the different constituencies, there's huge debates about whether are these still the correct forms of representation. And it's very questionable about the level of consultation, even within the various streams. So the current members of the council, even though they are of a national nature, we see that we have a greater debate about how deeply do we go in consulting within the various segments of the Nedlac, and obviously how then do they form a consensus when they meet in Rosebank. So we, as a chamber, are calling for a reform of the representation, as well as obviously the accountability of those who ultimately sit in the chamber at Nedlac.
Yeah. Riefdah, COSATU's view is that this would, to a greater extent, make things a little bit more difficult in terms of possibly reaching consensus. I mean, as we sit now, the president promised us probably 4 or 5 years ago that there's going to be a social compact that will be coming out. It's still not out. We are still waiting for what that social compact is going to look like. And that could be as a product of the inability to reach some degree of consensus in terms of conversation with social partners. What's your view as Fedusa?
think we have to contextualize the situation and look at the facts on the table. What we cannot divorce ourselves from and what we simply cannot hide away from is the fact that Nedlac has proven its muscle as being the premier social dialogue vehicle in South Africa, not just in terms of COVID, but beyond that particular process. It has not only brought the partners together closer in terms of the desire to want to achieve results and to achieve those results faster, but to ensure that we are able to represent our respective constituencies through consensus. When we speak about the social compact, unfortunately there are just so many facets of the compact that we need to take into account, and also to understand what particular compact we are talking about. There were various compacts that have been outlined and negotiated within the realm of Nedlac. So we need to understand, when you talk about a compact, you've got to talk about unconditional commitment to wanting to make the compacts work. We are here, and at the same time, there are certain elements that we have to advance on. When those dynamics are not there, we have to ask ourselves which of those elements we want to unfold, which of those elements we need to drive. So most certainly the desire is there, but unfortunately we have seen headwinds, we have seen turbulence on many fronts, and whilst we have been grappling with many factors such as the unemployment rate, how we advance on many other factors, we can't say that there is a lack or a non-political desire to want to take it forward. Yeah. A social compact calls for many facets that we have to take into account with the advancement of many other factors. So it is about the context within which we discuss the very social compact and the factors that are driving and mitigating various elements to see the compact through to its fruition.
Yeah. Now, Lisa, while we are on that, and unconditional commitments, it is said that that's precisely the challenge, is that the commitments are not unconditional. In fact, they're saying they become watered down because certain parties come with some degree of political influence on them. And therefore, the commitments that end up coming there are quite watered down. And of course, the two that are particularly pointed out is the minimum wage and the question on the right to strike, to say there was a compromise of some sort there because some folks came in with some degree of political influence.
Well, I see that Riefdah is busy shaking her head, so maybe she should answer that question. But, let's take both those issues, because let's be concrete. Yeah. I think there's a difference between watered down and agreeing to disagree on certain issues, but having sufficient consensus on other issues, which can be in the best interest, you're not always going to get 100% win-win for everybody. But with the minimum wage, yes, the social partners came with different views. And the current president, who was then the deputy president, President Cyril Ramaphosa, facilitated that process. And it was an achievement. It was an achievement of dialogue, of building trust, of hard negotiation, that a minimum wage was reached. Not everybody was happy, but the key social partners did agree to buy in. And there's a piece of legislation and there's a commission that helps to continue to regulate and manage the process. On the right to strike, and you talk about maybe political interference. Well, I don't know. But, the ruling party since 1994, in contrast to the previous government, believed as part of and there was a consensus in the Constitution that there should be a right to strike. And that right to strike has to be regulated in legislation. And, again, there might be some differences between the parties about exactly how you regulate it and how you manage abuse of the process, like violence in strikes. But I don't think there's any watering down of the right to strike. But let me hear from my co-panelists also.
Right, back live with you tonight on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. The Executive Director at Nedlac, Lisa Seftel, Fedusa General Secretary, Riefdah Ajam, and Advocate Mtho Xulu, President of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, joining us in this conversation on the inclusivity of Nedlac and the effectiveness of this council. Mohomotsi Maswabi on 072110554 says, I think Nedlac has developed into a toothless body. Social partners are not engaging with the intention of reaching consensus on matters of national interest. The President spoke about the social compact. To date, no progress has been recorded. Nedlac has turned into a forum of power dynamics and less of what it was intended to do. Riefdah, I want you to come in and weigh in on that. That's the power dynamics that they're saying are playing out, where certain relationships, political relationships, end up watering down the commitments. So they are not unconditional commitments, but they are commitments on who is on whose side, and therefore, where does the power lean?
I'm actually injured if I think about attempting to answer the question at this stage. And if this is the platform where we set the record straight, then truth must be told. We can continue to allow the African population to be guided. We can continue to push a narrative that is factually inaccurate, and we cannot create a narrative of falsities when we know for sure that not just when Nedlac was initiated by virtue of statute, but during the heart of COVID-19 2020. Let us just unpack a couple of things. But before I get to 2020, I say this with tears in my eyes, and I'm going to beg your indulgence on this one. When we talk about watered down, what exactly do we talk about? We have to move away from that narrative because it is a blatant lie. When we talk about watered down, and you are referring to the national minimum wage, I want to ask every single domestic worker and farm worker in South Africa who have been ejected, millions of them, from abject poverty as a result of the implementation of the national minimum wage. It wasn't a brilliant deal, but it was a step in the right direction, because at this stage, with the adjusted increments that were put in place to allow employers to gradually match what those wages should be, surely we would like to provide decent work and a decent life for every single South African. Yeah. We know that the dynamics in the country in terms of employment, and we don't even go to the ugly debate about inequality right now, but do you not want to see everybody progress? And then at the same time, the injustice that prevailed was after the national minimum wage.
Let me come in there, Riefdah, because that's precisely the question of equality that is being raised. So what do you say? SAFTU says that this particular minimum wage deal, right, they're saying it's a deal for a slave national minimum wage, which entrenches apartheid inequalities. That's why it has to be signed off laws that are basically undermining the limits of the rights of workers to embark on strike action. That's what Vavi says.
It's easy to throw stones, but now that you are part of the so-called elite club, what exactly do you want to portray to the South African public? At the time...
Well, it was passed before he was part of the club.
No, we certainly understand that, and by no ways is Nedlac an exclusive club. There are certain elements that need to be satisfied, and now that it has been satisfied, you can't continue to throw stones in the glass house. We are part of a progressive society that wants to ensure that we are not going to erode the gains that workers have made, but we also have to be honest. Just imagine you pay a national minimum wage to a domestic worker of 12,000 Rand. Who's going to employ domestic workers when we ourselves are employers of domestic workers? So it's a step in the right direction, but we can't jump too hard, too fast. There has to be a median ground that we have to take here, and unfortunately, We have to look at the facts on the table, and there were various stakeholders that were consulted as part of the Nedlac process when we advanced on these mandates. So that's the first thing that we have to get out of. The second thing I want to bring to your attention, when we talk about not just national minimum wage, when we talk about the domestic workers and the farm workers at the same time, some of us have a tendency to have short memories. For now, domestic workers have access not only to COIDA, but the guarantee of UIF. So when it comes to monitoring and compliance, we equally have to be vociferous in terms of how we make a difference. Because ultimately, when we put these things into law, it shouldn't just be there for all fancities. It needs to be safeguarded, and the monitoring and evaluation mechanisms needs to guarantee and guide that as well. I equally want to speak about the fact when we talk about watered down and other elements that is so... I'm struggling to find the right words here now, but when we take a look at COVID TERS and we talk about all the elements that were exposed during that time, UIF contributions, we talk about many of the other elements where we found that we could actually advance it to sectors that were not even contributing to UIF. So how is it that the narrative remains misguided, but we continue to fuel it? These platforms, such as Newzroom Afrika, you have a responsibility to be able to rectify the wrongs that are currently being put out there, failing which we are continually going to have commentators sitting in their armchairs and throwing those stones when we know full well that the negotiations are not always easy, but we are mandated and we have to execute them accordingly.
Yeah. Advocate Xulu, the question of inclusivity, others saying, well, if it means shifting or changing the balance of power in the council, then it is most welcome. And by shifting the balance of power, they're saying it must lean more, I suppose, on the side of the workers than currently it is benefiting maybe more the business and capital in particular.
Look, I think those who sit in council and at Nedlac, and if we want to maintain our relevance, is those who sit in council must understand that their responsibility is not just for their constituency. I think Nedlac, if you are to form social partnership and build a prosperous society, people must come into those negotiations with that view. So yes, there is a give and take, and you come there with obviously a mandate from your constituency. But it's not about shifting power from one side to the other. It is about how does business come to council and provide solutions that will take the country forward. And similarly with labor, they understand that their contribution is about how we build a productive society, a productive workforce, and a skilled workforce. And government needs to play its role as a regulator to ensure that they create that inclusive and conducive society to build such an economy. So it's not about either or. I think if you want to build a balanced tripartite approach, or actually the four constituencies, if you include the communities, it's not about one constituency being more powerful than the other. We need to build a institution that all South Africans from all walks of life can believe that discussions that take place there will benefit the country in the long run. And I think that's the responsibility that everyone must have in the Council of Nedlac. That yes, if you're from business, bring the solutions from business that will ultimately benefit everyone and not be in competition, because the country needs an inclusive and balanced social partnership.
Yeah. Lisa, the question of who gets accepted and the principle of admission, are you looking at changing that, make them a little bit more inclusive? And what would that look like? Because currently, I mean, for years, SAFTU was complaining to say, oh, we are not being admitted. And they say, we've got the numbers, we've got the people, we are the second largest union, but we are still being kicked out of Nedlac. Well, eventually they made it in, but indicating that, I suppose, the criteria for acceptance in terms of those principles was a little bit more tighter.
Okay, maybe just to say that I think it would really have enhanced this debate if SAFTU was here.
Absolutely. We did try to invite them. We did try to invite them. I agree with you.
Very much like shadow boxing, I don't know what you want to call it. But let me just say that SACT has been admitted under the current criteria. And, I'm not sure if it's too onerous or not onerous. There really were two things that they needed to meet. They needed to prove that they had membership of over 300,000 members. And if you're a strong union, if you're the second biggest union in the country, it should be easy to do that. And eventually they did that. The second thing that they needed to show the Nedlac and the Council of Nedlac was that they had audited financial statements. And I'm sure that we can all appreciate the importance of showing that your finances are in order. And also it's through your audited financial statements that you show real membership. And they were able to do that in the course of last year. Going forward, and I think this maybe also talks more to business representation, as I say, the new provisions in the bill have not yet been finally negotiated, and obviously the bill also needs to go to Parliament and it needs to be amended. But the idea is that one would insist that an organization must be national. One would have some threshold around numbers of members, as well as contribution to the GDP, particularly for business organizations. But what we are also looking at is that if you are, for example, let me give an extreme example, but not something that might really be possible. If, for example, you're a sex workers union, and you're not, or sex workers federation of unions that are involved in that sector, and neither COSATU, SAFTU, or NACTU and Fedusa represent sex workers, and then you are the most representative federation among sex workers, even if you don't have 300,000 members, which is unlikely, you could be admitted into Nedlac. So that's an additional criteria, and it applies both to unions and to employer organizations. And then in respect of the community constituency, who want to be called civil society, we are also trying to broaden that and make it more diverse. The current dispensation sort of says you must be youth or woman or, civic, while going forward, if you were an environmental organization, a federation of environmental NGOs, or you were a federation of LGBTIQ plus NGOs, then you would also be able to be admitted, provided, again, you met those criteria of that you're duly constituted, you're registered, not that there's a threshold of members, and that you're national in character. Yeah. I hope I've explained that well.
Because I wanted to say, does that mean if you don't have 300,000 plus, your views would not find way into the conversations, into the whatever policy conversations will be taking place?
So going forward, as I said, not yet finalized. So long as you could show you the most representative, even if it's not 300,000, you would come into Nedlac. Because, I agree with Advocate Xulu that diversity of representation is increasingly an asset in our society. And so, but you don't want diversity of special interests. You want real diversity of important interests in society. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. Well, we're out of time, so let's leave it there for today. And much appreciated, and thank you very much for coming on and adding your voices to the conversation tonight. That's the Nedlac Executive Director, Lisa Seftel, Fedusa General Secretary Riefdah Ajam, and Advocate Mtho Xulu, President of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And thanks to you as well for your engagements tonight.